Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm Christine Bradley, along with Connie Johnson, on behalf of the state of Florida. I want to thank you for your time and attention. I know sometimes it's hard to pay attention. I think on Law and Order, the longest I've ever seen them play a surveillance video is 6 seconds. They go, aha! Maybe they'll back it up 2 seconds and say, oh, yep, that's exactly what happened. They certainly don't ask you as a viewer to sit through 30 minutes from 3 different obstructed views and then watch, 300 some odd photos that were taken. They show one photo. But that's because that's television. This is real life. And we're dealing right now with the loss of the real life of Fakhruddin Mohammed Mehdi. My job with Ms. Johnson is to prove that. And I said during opening statements that my job was to put together all the puzzle pieces for you. And that's what we're here to do. Is to show you how everything goes together and explain which pieces apply to this puzzle that you're here for and which ones don't. So first, you've heard the elements as to what we have to prove. The first element, and you were instructed on, was that Fakhruddin Mohammed Mehdi is dead. First thing you're told. That's what the state has to prove. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get a stipulation signed by myself, Mr. Kema, and Mr. Baptista that we agree that Fakhruddin Mehdi is the deceased in this case. So all that we're asking for you to look at is element 2, which is, did Armando Baptista intentionally commit an act or acts that caused the death of Fakhruddin Mehdi, or the death of Fakhruddin Mehdi was caused by the culpable negligence of Armando Baptista? So we can prove it in 2 ways, either by the intentional act or culpable negligence. So you agreed to look for, and only look to the elements, and that's all that we have to prove. We don't have to prove a motive. We don't have to prove why. We just have to prove the elements of the charge. So let's talk about the reasonable inferences that we can draw from the evidence and the testimony that we've heard. So we heard from Wendy Gambolis. She's an eyewitness to this event. She's given 5 different statements before testifying here today in this courtroom before you, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to what she had to say, ladies and gentlemen. She said she has a new relationship with Mohammed. She wants him to meet her parents. Her mom's in town. You saw the text message that showed she's telling him, hey, Mom and Everett, they're almost to Fort Lauderdale. They just went through Orlando. And the address over in Hollywood. So now, you also know Mohammed has these lifelong friends. Corey, Walter, Saeed, that they came in and testified. Ladies and gentlemen, common sense shows that Mohammed Mehdi on that evening was being pulled between 2 different compelling interests. He has his lifelong friends on one side that he wants to maintain a relationship with. He has his new girlfriend on the other. And he's trying to keep everybody happy. He's trying to be everywhere at once, burning the candle at both ends. It's reasonable to infer that he was a little anxious, that Wendy wasn't happy and loving and sweet when they're running late to meet her mother for the first time, who has to get on a cruise ship the next morning. It's reasonable to infer that, yeah, maybe she was a little annoyed with him, that they made all these other stops and gone all the way out west to Miramar when they could have gone just north of 95. It's reasonable, ladies and gentlemen. You've also heard from Corey McMath. Corey, the soon-to-be birthday boy at the time, not a block party, not a party, but it was a pre-birthday celebration at his house. Corey, like I said, lifelong friends of Mohammed. But he says nothing's allowed to happen at his house. But the defense wants you to believe that Corey has called over Mohammed to come over and settle a score for Walter. Let's back up a second. If that is true, what also must be true? So let's go through all the dominoes that have to be in place for this to happen. I came up with 11. So first, Saeed, who's no relation to Walter or Corey, has to invite the victim over at 8:20 for that purpose. Now this is before Walter, Marlon, Armando Baptista, Demetrius Elder are at Corey's house. How does that fit into that theory? It doesn't. Here's the second thing that would have to happen. Armando's brother-in-law, who he's trying to meet up with, has to go to the house, has to be at that party, and stay there long enough for Armando Baptista and Demetrius Elder to get there. Testimony was he left. He left on 2 separate times. He was there for maybe 10 minutes. So if Armando Baptista's purpose in going to that party is to talk to his brother-in-law, and he's not there, well, there's another issue that we have with this hired hit to settle the score for Walter. Okay, let's go to the third step that would have to happen. Muhammad has to get to the party while Armando's still there. We've heard testimony that Muhammad's there 25 minutes, and that Wendy's trying to get him to leave and go back east to Fort Lauderdale. So then we also have to have Wendy, right, has to pick up Muhammad, because Muhammad doesn't drive. So we have to have a ride for Muhammad. Oh, and then Wendy has to get gas, if you remember, so that's another delay in getting them there all at the same time. Then they have to make the second stop at the other friend's house. So then they're actually west of Corey's house. Wendy testified they're going over a hill, and that would have been Red Road going over the turnpike to go back east, make a U-turn and head to Corey's house. And we still have to have everybody present for this to happen. Okay, so then we have to have Walter, Corey, someone approach Muhammad and ask him to take care of the situation. Walter says, no, I didn't ask him to do that. Corey says he never called him over for that purpose. So then, on top of that, because you're not allowed to fight at Corey's house, where, let's think about this logically, ladies and gentlemen, Muhammad would have had all of his friends there as backup if something went wrong. No, let's wait until Armando Baptista and Demetrius Elder get in a car and drive away. Then let's go after him. And let's hope, by the grace of traffic, they get stuck at that stop sign. Stuck at that stop sign long enough for the victim, Bakri Muhammad Knight, to go to that car and then attack them. Traffic is not controlled by Muhammad Knight. Another step that could not happen. It doesn't make sense. Okay, let's go on to the next step. So, if traffic isn't there, so then Muhammad Knight, the victim in this case, would have to know, somehow, that Demetrius Elder, who he's never met before, never spoken to, in fact, according to Demetrius Elder, never spoke to at the party, was going to have a medical episode, because he has a disease, myasthenia gravis. And he's going to have to stop and cough and catch his breath at that stop sign. Muhammad Knight could not know that. You can't make that next leap. Well then, the passenger door has to be unlocked for it to be ripped open, as the defense claims. And then you also have to believe that the victim is going to go up to a car that he doesn't know who's in, he thinks he knows who's in, but he doesn't know what is in that car. He doesn't know what weapons are in that car. He doesn't know if there's a knife in there. And go 2-on-1. Logical inferences, ladies and gentlemen. You can't get to that step without all of those things I just listed happening. Most of which are chance, luck, and out of the victim's control. It's not reasonable to believe that that's what the purpose of this was. It is reasonable to believe, and you can draw certain inferences from the evidence. You can believe, and you can believe or disbelieve any part of a witness's testimony. Be that of Demetrius Elder, be that of Wendy Gambolas, be that of a defendant's statement. So, talking about Demetrius, we know that he has a conversation with Walter Stanley, and Walter tells him, it's not a good scene, you need to leave, and take your friend with you. It's reasonable to assume, to make that inference, that Demetrius Elder goes to Armando Baptista and says, we have to leave. I'm worried something's going to happen to you and Walter. Okay, that's Demetrius' state of mind, and it's reasonable to infer that he told Armando. So now you have an idea of what Armando Baptista's state of mind is. He's on edge.
Objection, that's not evidence.
Overruled.
He's on edge. He's leaving. He's trying to still talk to his brother-in-law, who's no longer at the party. So then we have Wendy's testimony. That the victim, Fakhruddin Knight, Muhammad gets out of the car and has a conversation with Armando Baptista. That he's been told, look, let it go. Walter will handle whatever issues Walter has to handle. Walter's a grown man. He can deal with his own business. That he reaches out for a handshake. Ladies and gentlemen, what is that consistent with? That he's trying to let bygones be bygones. That he's making the attempt at this individual. So you watched the surveillance footage for X number of minutes. Gripping, compelling stuff, right? I know. There's a reason and a method to why every piece of evidence is put in. That surveillance footage shows, and you see the headlines, and you see people walking. You see people walking calmly. There's no rushing around, there's no scurrying until 9:51 and 10 seconds. That is when you see people start running. That is when you see people get in cars and leave in a hurry, because this event has just happened. So ladies and gentlemen, from that, you can infer from 9:38, when that surveillance footage starts, to 9:50, everything's good. It's calm, there are no issues. That's why that's in. So, you can also, that helps to corroborate the fact that there wasn't a fight at the party, that there wasn't tension, that there wasn't issues. Nobody's leaving because they're worried the cops are going to get called until the cops are actually called. Because you can see on the video at 9:51:40 that the surveillance shows the red and blue flashing lights of the Miramar officers that show up. Officer Yen. So let's think about more of the actual physical evidence that we have in this case. Because ladies and gentlemen, I'll be the first person to tell you, testimony changes. Memories fade. Physical evidence does not. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where the devil is in the details. You have Armando Baptista and Demetrius Elder, who have just killed a man, and they leave. They don't call the cops. They don't say they've been violently attacked. No. They take pictures of the car. Demetrius Elder admitted to you he took pictures of the vehicle before they left it. Why? Why do you take pictures of a car if you were the victim? Preserving evidence. But you don't call the cops, who could come out there and document, take things into evidence and test it, right? No. You take pictures yourself. So you have these two individuals that are together, and they tell you they're together after this event occurs, and they have to concoct a story. They have to concoct a story that goes with what they know about the physical evidence. Stand your ground. There we go. That sounds like a great strategy. Let's go with self-defense.
Objection, denigration of defense.
Overruled.
So we have them coming up with statements to match what they know about the physical evidence. But they don't have all of them. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why you as jurors aren't allowed to talk about the case and aren't allowed to make assumptions or start deliberating about what happens until the end. Because it's not until you have the full picture that you can make those connections and understand why blood spatter on the outside of the car is important. Because the pictures that we have on the inside of the car where they were sitting doesn't show that. It doesn't show drops of blood. It shows blood that's been transferred. It shows blood that's been on someone's hand and then touched the door column. It shows blood that's been transferred from someone's shirt to another, then to the car. It doesn't show blood spatter, but the outside of the car does.
Objection, facts not in evidence.
Sidebar. So ladies and gentlemen, look at the blood on the outside of that car. Whether or not it was transferred from one substrate to another. Look at it. Or if it's consistent with a fight happening outside of the car like Wendy Gimble says. Because ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of the physical evidence is to show you which testimonial evidence is believable. What makes sense? So, let's talk about the statement that the defendant gave. Back in June of 2014, the victim, Dr. Dean Knight, comes in, he's swinging the bottle, breaks it over his head of Armando Baptista. Okay. Now, we have to backpedal here on the stand because Demetrius Elder, at that point, they didn't know Demetrius Elder's DNA was the one that was actually on that bottle, not Dr. Dean Knight. And so you have the argument that, oh, well, skin cells don't transfer as much. Really? Well, then why are we... There's a collection of DNA from under your fingernails, skin cells. So Demetrius Elder on the stand, when confronted about the fact that it's his DNA, oh, and then in addition to that, his Yingling beer bottle caps that he acknowledges are in that center console. Okay. So if that is true, that it is his beer bottle that was in his car, that means that the statement given by Armando Baptista that the victim came in with the bottle swinging is a fabrication. They're trying to make a story fit with what they knew the evidence was, not the whole picture. Let's talk about that bottle again. So let's think logically, ladies and gentlemen. You have an individual who says he's sitting in the car, always wearing a seatbelt, always wears a seatbelt because he tells his kids to wear a seatbelt, so he always wears his seatbelt. Oh, but the pictures he put in evidence of himself after the event, in a car, he's not wearing his seatbelt. That's interesting. So if he is sitting in a vehicle, and this is the pictures from when the car was brought and found in Miami Lakes. On the outside, with the blood on the outside of the car, where no fight took place according to the defendant, but according to Wendy Gambolis, it did. We have pictures of the inside of the car, right? Here is the passenger seat. And look where that beer bottle is, right there in the back. Now, let's think about this logically. You're sitting in a car, in a passenger seat looking forward. You're chit-chatting with your friend, and somebody comes up, rips your door open, and starts hitting you over the head with the bottle. Here's the first problem with that. You have a roof over your head. So what swing is getting in? Okay, let's say, well, maybe he came in with a sidearm. Maybe that's how it happened. Okay. The bottle breaks over Mr. Baptista's head. Where does that glass go, ladies and gentlemen? On the seat there? Or in his lap? And then it just stays in his lap for the whole drive down to Miami? No, ladies and gentlemen, when he gets out of the car, if it had broken over his head in his lap, it would be on the ground outside. It would not still be in the car. It doesn't make sense for him to get in and sit on that beer bottle. Because he didn't know that it was there. He was trying to make something fit, a story to fit the evidence that he knew, which wasn't the whole evidence. So let's also talk about that. We have, in evidence, photos taken that we know were taken because we have 4 different people that testified that they were taken on May 9th of 2014. Roberto Caceres testified they were taken on May 9th, 2014. Jonathan Zeller testified they were taken on May 9th, 2014. Hector Bertrand testified they were taken on May 9th, 2014. That those are what the defendant looked like 2 weeks after the incident. So let's look at some of those pictures, ladies and gentlemen. So we know May 9th, 2014, Roberto Caceres takes these pictures. Ladies and gentlemen, you can see the skin color and the complexion of the individual in this photo. You can see the suntan. Ladies and gentlemen, your common sense comes into play here. Do people get suntan in that development of color and then just goes away? No, it takes a bit for that to develop. So let's go to this photo here. Let's go to the photo of the defendant's face. Now you also have the photos that, according to Demetra Selder, is what the defendant looked like right after this incident occurred. So let's look here. Let's switch over. Okay. So we have a mark on a very pale individual right there at his hairline. His receding hairline, right? There's thinning hair up here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. It's important for this reason. When you go on these pictures, and you see what the defendant looks like, and you see his hairline, and the pictures of the healed injuries, those are documented, healed injuries. So this isn't just fresh injuries that Roberto Caceres is taking, healed injuries. Right, so that one's consistent. I'll give them that. Yes, there's that mark on both photos. Look at the hairline, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the difference in these two photos. Here versus all the way back here. Okay, maybe it's a bad angle, but our argument wants to be made on that. Let's go to the next pictures. Okay, and let's zoom in here. So Roberto Caceres takes pictures of all of the healed injuries. So we have this mark here, right there. Look above it. Nothing, because there's a hairline there that's not in this picture. Mr. Elder didn't tell you he took these photos. He can't tell you who took these photos. You have a lack of evidence as to that, ladies and gentlemen. You have a lack of evidence as to the digital copies of these photos. They would have things like the time, the date, the location embedded in them. You don't have that. You have a photo that Demetra Selder, a convicted felon, is telling you that's what he looks like. Common sense, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that. Look at the tan lines. There is a suntan lines that you don't see here. And now, on these photos, Mr. Baptista in defense opening, you heard, was in the fight for his life. Holding a man off that's coming at him with a beer bottle, struggling against everything. Those are his only two injuries? Really? to injuries. That's the only thing you document. No bruises, no cuts, no scrapes, no defensive wounds. You heard from the medical examiner, Dr. Boyka. Defensive wounds are defined as wounds on the extremities. Wounds where you are trying to protect yourself, your major organs. Those are defensive wounds. We get a cut on the head, which, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you was impossible to happen because he had a hat on, because we have that hat, and that hat has no tears, holes, anything like that in it. That these were concocted after the fact. So, ladies and gentlemen, who does have evidence of self-defense? Dr. Dean Knight does. He has wounds on his arms, which are consistent with him throwing his hand up to block a punch. Ladies and gentlemen, it goes to time to look at the evidence and concoct a story. Wendy Gambolis, inconsistent in that he threw his arm up to block a punch. You heard that Wendy Gambolis was not at that autopsy. For her to know that he had thrown his hand up, she had to see it happen. To know that he had that arm and that cut. Look at what testimony matches the physical evidence and what puzzle piece doesn't fit. What looks like, well, maybe it's close, but it doesn't. So, some of the other pictures that we have in evidence, we're going to talk about the red solo cup for a minute. Now, the red solo cup was found on April 26th. And they say hindsight is 20/20. You can't find something you didn't know you were looking for. Detective Bertrand, Detective Zeller, they both stated they were on scene that night. They didn't know to look for the red solo cup, so they go back the next day when they did know to try and find it. So, ladies and gentlemen, look at the pictures of Corey McMahon's house. Look at this garage. What's the, oh, there's a red solo cup back there. And you can see there's some pictures in there. And I know these are not as easy to look at as the digital versions. But you can see there's 8 by 10 photos there. And you can see that's a regular 16-ounce solo cup. That this is not consistent with the small solo cup that was found. And it's a distinctive cup. But ladies and gentlemen, that's another piece of evidence that shows Wendy Gambolis is being honest. She's being forthright. She's answering the questions truthfully. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you, it's impossible to answer every question in this case. We cannot do that. If we could, we'd be up there as witnesses. It's only beyond a reasonable doubt that we have to prove the elements of the crime. That this was not a case of self-defense. That this was a case of manslaughter. So, I want to talk again about the injuries to Mr. Knight. So, I'm going to show you specifically 2 of the pictures of his face. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason why I'm doing this is to show you the pattern on his face. Ladies and gentlemen, Muhammad Knight has a pattern on his nose. You can see this right here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what in this case has that same pattern, that little grooves and kind of a semicircular? Well, hold on. Let's look at the beer bottle that was found in that car. The bottom of it. That's what has that pattern on it, ladies and gentlemen. You can look at that and compare it for yourself. One of the other things that's important that the medical examiner testified is that the injuries, the abrasions, the contusions, the bruising, the Dr. Dean Muhammad Knight could not have occurred from a single blow, that there was multiple blows. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Multiple blows. Now, this investigation started as a whodunit. There was no identified suspects. That had to be brought out. So the timeline is important on that. So we have the phone calls and the text messages. Specifically, Corey talks about the text messages and the phone calls, and he says that there was phone calls at 9:21. So from that, ladies and gentlemen, you can infer this reasonable inference, that Corey and Muhammad weren't at the same place because they're talking on the phone. They're sending text messages. So we know the victim doesn't get there till after 9:30. We have Saeed who testified that he texted, "I'm by Corey" at 8:21 on April 25th of 2014. That's the first person that let Muhammad know about anything going on at Corey's house. But Corey didn't invite anybody. That's been consistent. And that Wendy, texting back and forth with Mr. Knight. Mom and Everett are almost to Fort Lauderdale. She just called, they're entering Orlando. And then the address of the Best Western. So ladies and gentlemen, we have the evidence as well that Wendy did identify Mr. Baptista. She didn't do it here in court 4.5 years later. Frankly, he looked rather different than he did look in those photos. But she was able to look at the photos of Mr. Baptista and say, that is the person, that is the passenger that swung at Muhammad when he extended his hand to shake before turning for the car. So on the timeline that we have, ladies and gentlemen, Wendy drives from Coral Springs to pick up Muhammad in Hallandale to go to Corey's house. We get to Corey's house sometime between 9:25 and 9:35. Now we know nothing happens until 9:50, 9:51. We know that the surveillance footage shows those timings I referred to earlier, 9:51 to 9:40. So then we get to the collection of evidence. So we know that on April 26th, the early morning hours, crime scene comes through, they do the video, they take the photos. The victim's clothes are collected first at 2:34 a.m. It's important to this that there's an order as to why things were done, and they're done in order. The beer bottle spout (2:47 a.m.). So Demetrius Elder's DNA on this piece of evidence is the first thing that's collected from the scene at Terra Road near my apartment. There's no other DNA profiles on this item, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Comar, who has no horse in this race, he's just there to be an expert witness and analyze the evidence that we can submit to him, says there's only one profile on this, Demetrius Elder. That's it. He told you that if there was a major and a minor, like was on that hat, that would have been deduced. No, just one profile, Demetrius Elder. So we have that, then 2:48, the hat is collected. Coming in next day, that's of importance, May 2nd. That's when the Impala is found, through good old-fashioned police work. Again, because no one's called the law enforcement from Mr. Elder or Mr. Baptista about that car. That car is swirled away at the far end of an apartment complex. So May 3rd, everything's gone through in the car. Ladies and gentlemen, you saw the gloves that are used, the swabs that are taken, and some of those are processed. Would we like to have all of them tested? Yes. But as Detective Bertrand testified, once an identification is made, that's it. At that point, the lab isn't testing anything else. Without good cause from the state attorney's office. So ladies and gentlemen, we only have to prove the elements of this crime. Remember that. And there's no disagreement about the fact that Fakhruddin Mohammed Knight is dead. We have to prove that Armando Baptista caused it.
And I would object to the statement of the law.
So ladies and gentlemen, testing piece after piece after piece, we know who was in that car. Armando Baptista admits he was in that car. Demetrius Elder admits he was in that car. And we know Fakhruddin Knight wound up in that car when he was tussling with Armando Baptista. That's how we know whose blood's going to be in there. It doesn't have to be tested, every individual swab and stain. Gives testimony that they were all in that car. So going on to May 7th, that's when Demetrius Elder's DNA is collected. So far apart in time and place from the beer bottle being collected. Then we go to May 9th with the pictures, and Mr. Baptista's DNA is collected. So then you heard from Chris Comar, the DNA analyst. He tests the unknowns first. The evidence. He went through the beer bottle, he went through the hat brim, the money, before he got to the known standards, aka the swabs taken from the search warrants and from the deceased. He says that's on purpose, so there isn't going to be contamination. That's on different days, different times, different gloves, different settings. So, May 21st, that beer bottle spout is processed and sent to the Broward Sheriff's Office. That's where we have this oil spot on the bottle. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I can call it a duck all day long. But until you have an expert that gets up there and testifies that it quacks like a duck, it looks like a duck, and it walks like a duck, it's not a duck. It could be a bird, it could be a crane, it could be a swan. You need that expert testimony. Enter Danny Christian, who went through and analyzed that and said there was not enough for identification purposes. Look at that again, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to. There was no print on it. You can call it a print all day long, that does not make it true. Like the judge just told you, what the lawyers say is not evidence. It's what the witnesses testified to and what the physical evidence shows. So we have June 24th, Mr. Baptista's statement. And if you want to listen to that again, ladies and gentlemen, you can do that. That evidence will be with you to listen to at your leisure. July 2014, we have Demetrius Elder's statement. And then in October, we have the cell phone looked at. So all these items that you have the opportunity to look at and determine what you find reliable and to weigh the evidence on that. And that's your job as jurors. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, the state can say the defendant is guilty because we have proven him so, and that self-defense does not apply, that is a concocted, made-up, after-the-fact excuse that does not agree with the physical evidence in this case. Ladies and gentlemen, the state is asking you to return a verdict of guilty of manslaughter and to find that during that crime, the defendant, Armando Baptista, used a deadly weapon, that he caused the death of Fakhreddin Mohammed Knight. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attention.